So we're here to talk about how people develop their attachment styles, and our special guest is Mary, Dr. Mary Preisman.
Hi everyone.
Mary's our chief resident, and she's been putting up with us talking about attachment and how it pertains to medical illness for some time. It seemed only fitting that she got a chance to come in front of the cameras now.
Well, I'm really excited to be a woman in plaid.
So I think this is a complicated topic, and our job is to try and make it simple. So we're talking about kids and their mothers and fathers and how they develop one attachment style or another.
Okay, so I'll take a stab at the first part. The first part is the idea that the mom and the child are connected, and they're connected in a system that we've ended up referring to as attachment. And attachment really has two basic rules. The rules are kind of in opposition to one another. Rule number one for the kid is stay close to mom because that's safe. And rule number two for the kid is when you feel safe enough, go out and explore until it doesn't feel safe, and then come on back to get a dose of safety again. So kids, whether they're primates or humans, will oscillate between exploring and safety.
So it's a rubber band idea. Go out in the world and explore, and then when it gets scary, come on back.
So that's the basic premise of how it works between a mother and a child, at least in theory. But like any system, things can go differently, things can be varied, and depending on how the variations occur, we end up with different kinds of attachment.
So we want to take that basic setup and start to talk about, well, what are the circumstances under which a kid can develop a secure attachment, because that's the optimal outcome in attachment theory.
So the foundation for a secure attachment is, again, that relationship between the child and their mom. And a secure attachment typically comes from a relationship where a child's needs are met by mom in a consistent way, where mom is in tune with what that child needs at a given time. So feeling like if you have distress or if there's something that you need, that mom will respond to you in a way that makes sense given that situation, such that when you go to explore the world, you feel that you can do so and return to mom when you need something, and that she'll be there and be able to be in tune with you and provide you what you need when you start to feel like there's danger or that you've explored beyond your comfort level.
So it's interesting. You're talking about consistency, you're talking about responsiveness, you can also talk about warmth. The responsiveness is really the key ingredient there in helping a kid to become secure. And that means that mom, or dad for that matter, sort of appreciates where they are on that elastic band of going away and coming back, and so that they can be there when the kid needs them to be there, right? And responding in a way that's helpful at the time.
Okay, so that, I think, leads directly into the idea of how this sometimes doesn't work out so smoothly. You said the dad or the mom understands where the kid is on that continuum and responds accurately. So you can imagine that for reasons of their own, the parent might not perceive the kid accurately, or may be made anxious by the position the kid is in. Maybe they see the child who themselves feel like they're happily exploring. So they see the child is too far away, and they kind of gather the kid up as if it's unsafe. So there's a disconnect then between what the kid's experience is and what the parental message of the kid's experience is.
So attachment's all about relationships, right? So we're talking about what's going on with the kid, in the kid's world and in the kid's mind, but also what's going on in the parent's mind and whether they're well matched.
Yeah, and not to get crazy about it, but what's going on in the parent's mind about the kid's mind.
I mean, I think that's simple enough to say, right? That the parent has an appreciation of what the child is experiencing in that moment. Like they get it.
Right.
So they either get it or they don't.
So let's talk about some things that can happen with kids and some things that can happen with parents and how they match up with one another that could lead to kinds of insecurity that we can recognize and that we've been talking about in the other videos. Okay. So if you think about the kid, you can think about what happens when they're out there exploring in the world, right? For this system to work, they have to recognize danger and they have to feel alarmed and decide at that point to kind of turn back and seek comfort. So for some kids, that happens too easily, right? Because they're just born with an easy trigger. They get anxious easily, and that can just be their temperament. They're just born that way.
So that would be genetics, temperament kind of category.
That's right, yeah.
So that means that some kids then have sort of the opposite, where they go too far or further than we might expect because they don't feel alarmed or danger as quickly as we would think they might.
Right, so all variations are possible, right? And that's just driven by, that's just genetics. That's just everybody's born a little bit different. Parents also react to their kids being at a distance differently, and some parents are quite comfortable with that and can allow them to explore and watch and notice when they need them again. And for some parents, that just makes them really anxious, and their anxiety is rising the further the kid gets, even if the kid's content. And so they're going to be hovering close no matter what the circumstances are.
Right, hovering elicits that image of a kind of helicopter parent who can't let their kid get out of their sight.
Right, so so you start to see that the roots of an anxious attachment or what's going to become in an adult a preoccupied attachment comes from anxiety, either from the parent or from the kid, and most typically from the parent, right? I mean, the most common way that this happens is you've got a parent who really has a great deal of difficulty tolerating their child's independence, and so they're anxious a lot of the time, and so that kind of clinging, close, dependent relationship is driven primarily by mom or dad's anxiety.
So that then signals to the kid that what they thought initially may have been safe and okay to explore is actually much more dangerous than they had anticipated, and that actually they should be more anxious about whatever it is that they're doing, taking cues from their parent about their reaction.
Yeah, they're dead on the mark. They're learning about danger, and they're learning about danger in situations that didn't feel dangerous to them previously.
So I'm having a reaction to this. It's a reaction that Bob and I have had talking publicly about this before, and that is that it sounds like we're saying the parent screws up the kid, right? That it's the mom's fault or it's the dad's fault. So we have to identify that although the characteristics of the parent matter, the characteristics of the child also matter, the fit between them matters, and of course the surround matters.
I guess the other caveat to throw in there is that I was putting the weight on anxiety in the kid and anxiety in the mom or the dad, whereas consistency is at least as important, right? And so a parent that's sometimes there in a kind of in the way that the child needs, and sometimes is too preoccupied with their own stuff and inattentive, that makes a kid anxious.
Well, that also makes it easier for them to learn about which situations they should feel more anxious about if there's a consistency in parents' reactions. So it's hard to learn when each time you do the same behavior, you get a different response, whereas it's much easier to learn if every time you do something, you get a similar response back. So you kind of expect what's coming next.
So far I've been emphasizing the anxious parent. There's another kind of parent you could think of as sort of being at the end of a spectrum away from the anxious parent that is kind of underreactive. They tend not to be emotional, and they tend to downplay emotionality in their kids. So if the kid clings, if the kid cries, the parent's going to give them a message, that's not good behavior, don't like that. If you want to be around me, don't behave that way. So the kid gets a message about turning the volume down on attachment behavior, being self-sufficient, being independent.
Yeah, so, and he said, if you want to be around me, then tone it down. And of course, the premise is the kid does want to be around you, right? Because all kids need that attachment to their parents.
That's rule number one, right?
Right.
You've got to be close to your secure base.
Right, it's absolutely obligatory. And so that kid's learning, in order to stay close to you, I'm going to look like I don't want to, or I don't need to, right? So they're learning to fake it.
So in that same process of learning, they're getting the consistent response that being more independent and less needy of their parent makes their parent more accepting of them and is rewarded versus being punished for crying, seeking help overtly. A child whose parent dismisses them and has a dismissive attachment style learns that by, as you said, faking it and acting like everything is just fine and they don't need you, that's the best way to remain attached to that parent.
Yeah, that's what they're learning. And you put your finger on another thing, which is consistency, right? So the kind of parenting that brings out a dismissing response from kids tends to be pretty consistent. It tends to be consistently downplaying or even consistently punitive of a kid looking like they're in distress, whereas inconsistency is what was driving the anxiety and preoccupation that we were talking about before.
So that kid looks fine, but an important thing to recognize is that on the inside they're not fine. Nobody's surprised to understand that the anxious looking kid is in fact anxious. They have a high heart rate, they have physiological stress. These kids don't look it, as Bob says, they've learned how to fake it, but inside their physiological markers are cranked right up. Their heart rate is just as high, other measures are just as high. These are stressed kids, even though they don't look it.
And that also emphasizes that those kids are putting in work to look as cool, calm, and collected as they do on the outside. That's not a passive thing, that's an active process that they're working on.